In this video, we're going to be taking a look at component 2, section A, which is the TV unit, and with a particular look at Peaky Blinders. The principal focus is going to be on industry with a bit of audience and representation, because you can't really look at the impact of ownership without looking at how audiences are affected and how representations are appropriate for the BBC, in particular for Peaky Blinders here. So we'll start with a look at the BBC, and it's important to note that the BBC in its current format is under threat. The current government are looking to phase out the licence fee and asking the BBC to consider alternative models. The number of licence fee payers is down year on year, so there's a funding crisis in the BBC. That's because so many people are consuming their media online now and choosing therefore not to pay the licence fee. Some of the arguments against the licence fee are that it's a regressive tax because it charges everybody the same amount regardless of their income. Now, other models that are being considered at the moment are for it to be funded through taxation, and then a government grant given to the BBC. That is problematic because the BBC really, to operate as it does as a public service broadcaster, needs to maintain its independence from the government. Otherwise, it's at risk of being influenced by the government, as the press is, if you've studied newspapers. Other models are subscription models, such as Netflix, Disney Plus, and the like. But again, once you go to a subscription model, the risk is that the BBC loses its independence, as it would be if the BBC started to advertise. Because, of course, as you start to advertise, as you become a commercial broadcaster, you are immediately influenced by the ideology of your advertisers. And once you start advertising, you can never be an ideologically independent broadcaster as the BBC is set up to be. Now, the most likely funding mechanism for the BBC going forward is for there to be a levy on broadband subscriptions, so that within everybody's broadband fee there would be an additional fee paid, which would be compulsory. So everyone would pay that within their broadband subscription. This would mean that people can't get out of paying the licence fee, and that everyone who has a broadband subscription would need to pay it. But obviously all of this is up for debate, and the licence fee in its current format will run until 2027, and then it will need to be reconsidered and reapplied for. But this is important because certainly from my own personal perspective, the BBC in its current format is hugely important. It's not only a symbol of British identity, but it is a symbol of independent and unbiased press and media within a media landscape where the reliability of news is increasingly, news and drama and other formats is increasingly called into question. So for me, the BBC in its current format is crucially important, and I think it's going to be important moving forward that they find a funding mechanism which allows the BBC to maintain its independence. With that in mind, we're going to have a look at a couple of theories here. The top one is Cohen and Seaton, the bottom one is Hesmanhauge. Now, the BBC very much supports Cohen and Seaton's idea that more socially diverse patterns of ownership help to create the conditions for more varied and adventurous media productions, because the BBC, as an independent broadcaster, as a public service broadcaster, is ideologically independent. It is not, its ideology is not determined by its advertisers or its commercial partners, and it needs to be representative of its entire audience. So it needs to represent everybody. It is free to be driven, therefore, by ideology and social purpose rather than profit and power. It does not have to satisfy shareholders. It does not have to satisfy commercial partners. Now, there are, of course, lots of other commercial pressures. It needs to make money. It needs to justify the license fee. And for that reason, we're gonna have a look at Hesmanhauch here, who says that cultural industry companies, which the BBC is one, try to minimise risk and maximise audiences through vertical and horizontal integration and by formatting their cultural products, e.g. through the use of stars, genres and serials. Well, of course, Peaky Blinders is a safe genre. We're going to have a look at TV drama as a genre in a moment. It uses Cillian Murphy's star appeal to guarantee audiences, which makes it commercially attractive. And therefore, Peaky Blinders, we're going to have a look at lots of the reasons why the BBC screens Peaky Blinders, but one of them is that it makes it money. It justifies the license fee in that it makes the BBC commercially viable, and therefore the BBC is managing its own risk through the use of or through the production of and the screening of a show like Peaky Blinders. And with that in mind, we're going to consider the genre. Now, it's a TV drama, and TV dramas are the most popular on TV. They guarantee high ratings, high audience figures. Fans of the genre tend to be loyal, and therefore there is a guaranteed audience to a degree for something like Peaky Blinders. In doing that, in producing something that is high quality, that appeals to the broadest spectrum of British society, the BBC justifies the license fee, and therefore Peaky Blinders is a highly appropriate show for them to produce and broadcast. But more than that, they are easy to market. Globally, British dramas are very, very popular. The three examples on the right there, The Tourist, Luther, Happy Valley, there are lots of others which have been sold abroad, syndicated abroad, and the BBC makes lots of money from that. Spin-offs as well can be produced, which again generate more income, and they can export the show globally, and 49% of global sales for the BBC are made up of TV drama. So this is a genre where the BBC is making most of its money. But of course, dramas also reflect the diversity of the community that the BBC is serving and appeal to the whole nation. And that's important for a company which is a public service broadcaster and therefore needs to represent the people who pay for it. And finally, in terms of genre, hybridity is important. This is not just a drama, it's a period drama, it's also a crime drama, but it's also a gangster thriller as well. Three of the most popular genres on TV. And by hybridizing those genres, the BBC ensures that its audience is as broad as it can possibly be. So the BBC, the Peaky Blinders as a global production. Global production is hugely important for the BBC finances because it generates income and promotes the BBC's brand around the world, which helps to satisfy its public purposes, which we'll look at in a moment. The BBC is vertically integrated, has its own in-house production unit, as well as a commercial subsidiary, and BBC Worldwide, which distributes its products and services around the world. So it can control the whole process from production to global distribution, and therefore it maximises its income and maximises its exposure around the world. Originally, Peaky Blinders was distributed in the US by the Weinstein Company, but because of the controversy associated with Harvey Weinstein, the rights were sold to Netflix. And in 2021, Peaky Blinders was Netflix's most watched programme globally. This is a huge success story for the BBC, again, promoting its brand and generating income. And the BBC has a global reputation as a quality media brand, which less well-known channels or platforms would be eager to collaborate with. So that's why it's important for the BBC to produce high-quality, commercially attractive, globally attractive dramas such as Peaky Blinders. So now let's consider what the BBC's aims and objectives are. Their core mission says here, is defined by the Royal Charter to act in the public interest, serving all audiences through the provision of impartial, high quality and distinctive output and services which inform, educate and entertain. This is, of course, all about entertainment. But it also has 5 public purposes. The public fund the BBC, and therefore the BBC must represent that public that funds them. There are 5 public purposes which you'll know through your study of the media. The 3 that we're particularly going to focus on for Peaky Blinders are creative, high quality output, which we've already looked at, and then the bottom 2, to reflect, represent and serve the diverse communities of all the UK's nations and regions, and in doing so support the creative economy across the UK. So that's about being representative of everybody in Britain, but also to support the creative industries throughout the UK. The BBC has often been accused of being London-centric, and moving and supporting other areas of the country is crucial to the BBC's purpose. And then to reflect the UK, its culture and values to the world. And that's why the globally attractive nature of Peaky Blinders is so important. So we're going to consider this one first. This is reflecting the diverse communities of all of the UK's nations and regions, and in doing so supporting the creative economy across the UK. And I've put that screenshot, Birmingham, England 1919, because the fact that this is set in Birmingham is so important. We'll have a look at that on future slides. So Peaky Blinders as a BBC production. It's a co-production between 2 independent producers, Karin Manderbach and Tiger Aspect. So the BBC is supporting independent producers and therefore the creative industry, and the Yorkshire Screen Fund. The show was first to receive a grant from Yorkshire Screen Content Fund, set up to promote production and representation of the county. So there is the BBC representing the creative industry around the UK. It's created by Stephen Knight, who grew up in Birmingham and has previously written several successful crime dramas. So this is the BBC promoting a particular region of the country, an underrepresented region of the country. And the Midlands, which has been considered to be neglected by TV production. There's always the accusation that the BBC and other media industries are London and southeast focused. And so to represent an underrepresented region is hugely important for the BBC. The BBC isn't constrained by the commercial model of other broadcasters. So instead of playing it safe, they have the freedom, and in fact they have the responsibility to develop fresh and unique content, particularly which produce and reflect the diverse voices of the UK. And certainly, having watched Peaky Blinders, you will know that this is representing diverse voices from across the UK. But as well as just representing a particular region of the country, the BBC here is actually financially supporting a particular region of the country and changing the perception of that region of the country. The Birmingham and the West Midlands, which for so often has been tarred with the brush as being the industrial heartland of the UK. Well, certainly Peaky Blinders has played a significant role in what we might term the cultural renaissance of this particular region. There was a Peaky Blinders festival in Digbeth, attended by 20,000 people in costume. A picture you can see at the bottom there as part of that festival. There's been a huge boom in TV tourism. TV tourism is huge around the world. TV shows promote particular areas, but also people visit them to see the locations in which they're filmed. And there's been a huge boom in that in the West Midlands, particularly from America. A 50% increase in tourists to Birmingham and the West Midlands from America. And of course, American tourists bring huge spending power with them. And so that's a major boost to the West Midlands economy. There's been increased footfall and sales at the Black Country Museum in the West Midlands, which is one of the central filming locations for the show. And there are loads of walking tours and theatre productions and dance shows, all centred around Peaky Blinders. So the BBC has fulfilled its duty not just to represent diverse voices from around the UK, but to promote the cultural industries across the UK. And they've certainly done that for Birmingham through the production of Peaky Blinders. But more than that, Peaky Blinders actually provides a voice for an entire community of people, an entire social group. And as this article from The Guardian points out here, it says, the Peaky Blinders cult is another sign of our discontented times. And the article is about how the show has given a voice and empowered the working classes of the UK, who at a time of financial hardship feel to a certain extent disenfranchised from the successes of Britain and feel distanced from those who are running the country. And certainly Peaky Blinders is a show which is empowering those working class communities of the UK. And in the caption here to the photo of this article, it says, "One of the great pleasures of the show is seeing approximations of my own sharply dressed working class black country grandfathers redeemed from historic erasure." So it's representing underrepresented or misrepresented groups. And that is, of course, part of the BBC's function and purpose and responsibility. But more than that, it empowers entire communities. As Henry Jenkins talks about, he talks about participatory culture, the way in which people now have the power to use the media for their own purposes. They can share media content, they can produce their own content, they can also do what he calls textual poaching, where they can use the text to construct their own identity. And you can see in the bottom there are so many events now where people dress up as the Peaky Blinders. So they're taking that element of the show and using it to construct their own identity. Similarly, Jenkins says that this in turn can empower marginalised communities, and there are huge communities of Peaky Blinders cosplay around the world. There's an example here from Reddit with 202,000 members where people share their costumes. Now, previously, cosplay communities empower people who might otherwise have been regarded as geeks, as TV geeks, and belittled because of that representation. What is possible now, and what Peaky Blinders does, and why this is so appropriate for the BBC, is it empowers those marginalised communities. But for all people across the UK, it allows them to in some way construct their own identity by engaging with and sharing and borrowing from this particular text. And to finish off, we're going to have a quick look at representations, because it's also really important that the BBC reflects the diverse communities of the UK. Now, this is a largely very, very white show, but that's because it's set in 1919 Birmingham, and it has to be reflective of that particular time. But it also needs to reflect the communities of 2013, because that's the audience that is watching Series 1, Episode 1, which is your set text. Now, in 1919, we have the post-war reshaping of masculinity and femininity, which we'll look at in a moment. But we've also got the modern reshaping of toxic masculinity, which is represented in this show, and we've got the modern representations of empowered femininity. So it's a show which needs to maintain its realism. It needs to be set in 1919 and reflect 1919. But for the BBC to achieve its purpose, it also has to reflect its audience of 2013 too. So we'll start by having a think about femininity, particularly Polly, Ada and Grace. With Polly, we've got the matriarchal figure, but she's a very strong female character. So we've got empowered femininity. And she says to Tommy, this whole bloody enterprise was women's business while you boys were away at war. This reflects the idea that during World War I, women took on a much more stereotypically masculine role in society, certainly in terms of the jobs they were doing and the function they were asked to serve. So it reflects that idea, but it also reflects the sense of empowered femininity that a 2013 audience would expect. Ada's slightly different. Ada is more stereotypically feminine, often in white clothing, in high keys, soft lighting. She has a particularly feminine quality, but of course at the same time she is having an affair with her brother's enemy. And so she is also a strong female character in many ways. So she's reflecting expectations of 2009, of 1919, but also of 2013 as well. And then of course we have Grace, who is a hyper feminine character, but particularly in that moment in episode 1 when she's singing to the bar, she uses that femininity as a tool of power. So she's very much reflective of modern notions of empowered femininity. And then we've got masculinity, and we're only going to consider Tommy Shelby here. But Tommy provides for us a more nuanced representation of masculinity, which is appropriate for both its setting in 1919 and its reception by a modern audience in 2013. Because in many ways, he's a hyper masculine character. He's strong, he's dominant, he's violent in so many ways, but also, and that would reflect masculinity of 1919, particularly in the post-war era, but also Tommy reflects this modern notion of the modern man, and the BBC are looking to break down expectations of toxic masculinity, because he's also a cerebral character. He says, I think, Arthur, that's what I do. He's intelligent. He thinks about things. He's also caring about his family, about his friends, about his colleagues. So yes, he has all the aspects of stereotypical masculinity, but he also brings us this slightly different side. So the BBC are looking to be representative here of modern femininity and modern masculinity in order to accurately reflect and appeal to the modern audience that is funding them at the time the show is produced.